Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live took an unexpected and chaotic turn when Hollywood icon Harrison Ford stormed off the set following a searing verbal clash with host Jimmy Kimmel. What started as a routine promotional appearance quickly unraveled into one of the most explosive moments in the show's history, as the two clashed over politics, celebrity responsibility, and the state of modern discourse. From the moment Harrison Ford stepped onto the stage, there was a sense of unease in the air. The 81-year-old actor, beloved for his iconic roles as Han Solo and Indiana Jones, carried his usual weathered charisma, stoic, reserved, and coolly self-assured. But beneath the calm exterior was something taut, like a coiled spring waiting for the right moment to snap. Harrison Ford, everybody, the man, the myth, the legend. Kimmel beamed as the audience erupted in cheers. Ford gave a curt nod, his face barely cracking a smile, as he made his way to the guest chair. He thanked the audience briefly and sat with the air of someone who had done this 1,000 times, but wasn't particularly thrilled about doing it again tonight. The opening minutes were pleasant enough. Kimmel teased Ford about his grumpy reputation. They laughed about flying accidents and retirement rumors. Ford spoke about his latest film, some nostalgic sci-fi epic that seemed custom-built for legacy fanfare. The audience laughed and clapped in all the right places. But then, the shift. Kimmel leaned back, adjusting his cue cards, a faint smirk on his lips. You know, Harrison, you've been in Hollywood a long time. You've seen it evolve. Some say for the better, some say not so much. How do you feel about how we treat celebrities who say the wrong thing these days? Ford's face hardened. He sat up slightly straighter, his jaw tightening just a bit. What do you mean by the wrong thing? His voice, low and gravelly, echoed slightly in the studio. Kimmel didn't miss a beat. You know, people facing consequences for outdated views, offensive remarks. Some call it accountability. Others call it cancel culture. You've never been shy about your opinions. Ever worry that one day you'll say something and the whole internet will come for you? The air in the room thickened. Even the band seemed to go quiet. Ford's lips pressed together before he answered. I think people should be able to speak freely without losing their livelihoods because someone online got offended. There was a noticeable pause. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some clapped hesitantly. Others stayed silent. Kimmel raised his eyebrows. So, you think some people are being unfairly targeted? I think, Ford said, slowly and deliberately, we've lost the ability to distinguish between mistakes and malice, between actual harm and just an unpopular opinion. The tension escalated rapidly. Kimmel leaned in. But Harrison, don't you think public figures, especially ones with as much influence as you, have a duty to be mindful of what they say? Ford's brow furrowed. Mindful? According to who, Jimmy? Twitter? Executives in boardrooms trying to predict the next outrage trend. There was no chuckle this time. The studio audience was uneasy. This wasn't the usual late-night banter. This was a confrontation. Kimmel's smile had faded into something tighter, colder. I'm just saying there's a line. When someone crosses into hate speech or bigotry. And who draws that line? Ford interrupted, his voice steady but rising. The network? A hashtag? I've seen people get destroyed for saying something 10 years ago. You think that's justice? Kimmel held his ground. I think people should be held responsible. Words have consequences, especially when they harm others. Only certain people's words, right? Ford snapped. Only the ones who don't fit the narrative. Kimmel shifted in his seat, posture tightening. It's not about narratives. It's about accountability. When someone with a platform spreads ideas that marginalize people, there have to be consequences. Ford's eyes narrowed. Ideas that you decide are marginalizing. I've been in this business longer than cancel culture has been a phrase, Jimmy. I remember when disagreement wasn't treated like violence. A few audience members clapped, quickly silenced by glares from others. The energy had turned from curious to combustible. Kimmel chuckled dryly, though there was no humor in his voice. So you're saying people shouldn't face backlash at all? No matter what they say. I'm saying outrage shouldn't be the default reaction to everything. Ford's voice was calm, but heavy with conviction. I'm saying we've replaced dialogue with destruction. Kimmel leaned forward. You know, that sounds a lot like defending people who say bigoted things and then cry foul when they're called out. Ford's jaw flexed. And calling someone a bigot has become the easiest way to end a conversation you don't want to have. The audience was silent again. The tension in the air was almost visible. Even the camera operators paused for a beat, unsure whether to keep rolling or brace for a cut to commercial. Kimmel's tone darkened. You say we should talk more, but what about when people use that talk to justify hate? What about when that so-called dialogue is used to keep others down? Ford leaned in now, a steely fire behind his gaze. There's a difference between hate and dissent, Jimmy. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're part of the problem. That hit hard. Kimmel's mouth tightened, his practiced persona slipping. So, dissent is what we're calling it now when celebrities mock trans people or deny racism exists? Ford's eyes locked on his host. I didn't say any of that. But it's funny how quickly you jump there, isn't it? You've already decided that anyone who doesn't parrot your beliefs must be mocking, or denying, or hateful. Kimmel's voice grew sharper. I believe in standing up for people who are marginalized. If that makes me part of some so-called mob, fine. I'll wear that. Ford's laugh was hollow. You're not standing up, Jimmy. You're sitting behind a desk throwing stones, protected by applause and ratings. That's not courage. That's curated outrage. The line drew audible gasps. In the control room, a producer's voice crackled into a headset, urging a quick pivot, but the host wasn't backing down. Kimmel stood, slowly, matching Ford's rising posture. You know what? Maybe it's time someone stood up to you, Harrison. Maybe your generation got used to saying whatever it wanted without ever being challenged. Ford's lips curled, not into a smile, but something colder. And maybe your generation got used to pretending outrage is virtue. There was no laughter, no applause, just the quiet hum of equipment and the stunned silence of an audience who knew they weren't watching entertainment anymore. They were witnessing a breakdown. Do you even hear yourself? Kimmel asked, voice trembling with anger. You sound like every aging actor who's bitter the world moved on without him. Ford stepped forward. And you sound like every smug host who thinks claps make him right. The two men stood now, face to face across the desk, not as host and guest, but as adversaries in a deeper philosophical war. The studio lights seemed harsher, shadows longer. The set, usually a safe space for quips and applause, had become a battleground. Kimmel's voice dropped. You don't think there's real harm being done out there? That words, when amplified by celebrity, can ruin lives. Ford's eyes burned. Of course words matter. That's why it's so dangerous when you weaponize them with labels. You've made it so anyone who speaks out of turn gets branded forever. No trial, no nuance, just public execution by social media. Kimmel snapped back. It's not execution, it's exposure. People are finally being held accountable. We're finally shining light where it used to be dark. Ford's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You don't shine light, you set fires. You don't want understanding, you want obedience. There was a sudden, electric shift in the audience. Some clapped, others booed. Most just stared, spellbound. Kimmel's voice was brittle. That's rich, coming from a man who built a career on fantasy and now wants to lecture people on reality. Ford stepped out from behind the guest chair, moving to the edge of the desk, his 6-foot frame towering. You want reality, Jimmy? Here's reality. I've worked with crew members who risked everything to make a movie. I've stood beside people from all walks of life who couldn't care less about trending hashtags. They care about feeding their families, about surviving. And when you cancel one person to look righteous, it's not just them who suffers, it's everyone connected to them. Kimmel stared him down. You act like you're some martyr for free speech, but what you're really doing is protecting power, old, white male power. Ford's laugh was short, humorless. There it is. The holy trinity of buzzwords. That's your whole argument, isn't it? If someone disagrees, they must be a dinosaur. No, Kimmel said, almost shouting now. If someone defends bigotry, they're the problem. And if someone questions your tactics, they're the enemy. Ford fired back. You don't argue. You label. You dismiss. You destroy. The room had shifted from tense to volatile. Audience members had their phones out despite security's presence. The control booth was in chaos. Executives were shouting through earpieces. A hand hovered near the cut-to-commercial button, but no one dared to press it. Kimmel's face flushed deep red. You know what I think, Harrison? I think you've been insulated for so long by yes men and fan adoration, you can't handle the fact that the world is changing. You're scared. Ford leaned in, his voice dangerously low. You think this is fear? This is clarity. I've seen real oppression. I've stood next to people being shot at, literally. You think a hashtag is hardship? You have no idea what courage costs. Kimmel straightened. We're not talking about war zones. We're talking about people right here being hurt by words. And you think silencing dissent helps them? Ford's voice rose, not yelling, but thunderous in its weight. You don't fix injustice by erasing voices. You fix it by confronting ideas, even ugly ones. That's what freedom means. There was a pause, a long one. Even the hum of studio equipment seemed to vanish. Kimmel stared at Ford like he didn't recognize him anymore. Freedom doesn't mean saying whatever you want without consequences. No, Ford agreed, but it does mean being allowed to speak without being lynched by likes and retweets. Kimmel's shoulders were tight now, his fists clenched beneath the desk. The well-trained performer in him was gone. What remained was a man locked in a confrontation he hadn't anticipated and was rapidly losing control of. So that's it, he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. You think people should just be able to say anything without a single repercussion? You think hate doesn't have victims? Ford stepped forward again, close enough now that the edge of Kimmel's desk separated them like a barricade. No, Ford said, slow and deliberate. I think people should be allowed to think, to question, to disagree, without being reduced to caricatures, without being burned at the stake for a comment made in a different time, under different circumstances. Kimmel pointed a finger. That's a cop-out. That's what they all say. Different time, different context. It's just an excuse for never having to apologize. Ford's voice dropped, quieter now, but colder. It's not an excuse. It's a reality. History is context. Without it, you're just punishing shadows. The studio was absolutely still. Even the crew, usually unfazed by celebrity spats, was frozen. Kimmel laughed bitterly. You're defending people who've said awful things, people who've hurt others. You want me to believe it's noble? I'm defending the principle that people deserve a path to redemption, Ford snapped. That we can't just destroy everyone we disagree with and call it progress. Kimmel stepped around the desk now, face to face with his guest. Some things aren't forgivable. Ford didn't flinch. That's not your decision to make. Kimmel's eyes narrowed. It's society's. No, Ford said sharply. It's the mob, and you're handing them the torches. That line hit hard. The audience gasped. A few applauded instinctively, unsure whether they should. Kimmel, visibly shaken, tried to shift. Look, I'm not trying to cancel anyone. But if someone spreads hate, and who defines hate? Ford shot back. Some intern with a TikTok? A blogger with a chip on their shoulder? Or a host who lives off conflict? Kimmel's tone hardened. If that's what you think I do, why did you come on the show? Ford's answer was instant. To talk about a film, not to be ambushed with political traps. But maybe it's good this happened. Kimmel raised an eyebrow. Oh really? Ford nodded. Because maybe it shows people what this really is. Not a talk show. A tribunal. A place where opinions are tried and sentenced live in front of a clapping audience. You think I don't believe what I say? Kimmel challenged. You think this is all for show? I think you've forgotten the difference, Ford replied. Between truth and performance. Between asking questions and demanding compliance. Kimmel took a breath, trying to center himself. So what, Harrison? We just say nothing? Let hate fester because we're afraid to offend. Ford looked him dead in the eye. No, we confront it, with reason, with debate, not with character assassinations and hashtags. Kimmel shook his head slowly, voice now trembling on the edge of frustration. Debate? You call this debate? You came in here, sat down, and unloaded like I was the enemy. Ford's tone was ice. No, Jimmy, you decided I was the enemy the moment I didn't agree with you. I'm not your enemy, Kimmel replied, raising his voice, but I'm not going to sit here and nod while you minimize the real harm that comes from hate speech. Ford stepped in, voice rising for the first time. And I'm not going to sit here while you redefine everything you disagree with as hate speech. The words echoed like a gunshot across the studio. The audience was motionless, breathless. The red, on air, sign might as well have read, danger. Ford continued, eyes blazing. I've spent my life playing heroes, but not once did I mistake acting for authority. You sit behind a desk and decide which opinions are safe, which voices get silenced, and you call that justice. Kimmel, visibly rattled, fired back. At least I use my voice to stand up for people who've been ignored. I don't just cash checks and fly vintage planes. Ford laughed, low, bitter, unmistakably angry. You think what I do is easy? You think risking your body, your reputation, your sanity for this industry is some joyride? I've earned everything I have. Not with lectures, with work, with commitment, with truth. You call this truth? Kimmel snapped. You're defending people who get rich spewing ignorance. I'm defending everyone's right to be heard before they're condemned, Ford barked. Even the ones I don't like. Because that's what real tolerance looks like. Kimmel's face darkened. No, Harrison. Tolerance has limits. Ford stepped even closer. That's not tolerance. That's control. Now they were inches apart. The cameras caught every twitch of Kimmel's clenched jaw, every steel thread in Ford's stare. You talk about consequences, Ford said, his voice a low growl. Let me tell you something. Real consequences don't come from Twitter mobs. They come from a life lived without compromise. You think I'm compromising? Kimmel asked, almost scoffing. I think you've confused applause with integrity, Ford answered. A hush fell again. Kimmel exhaled sharply. You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe this wasn't the place to have this conversation. But you made it one. I didn't start this, Ford said, but I won't let you finish it on your terms. He looked out over the audience, still frozen in disbelief. You all came here expecting laughs, a few stories, maybe a funny anecdote about Harrison Ford forgetting where he parked the Millennium Falcon. But instead you got this, a moment of truth in a place built on scripts. Ford turned back to Kimmel, the finality in his voice unmistakable. I came to talk about a movie. Instead, I watched a man confuse moral grandstanding with genuine courage. You wanted fireworks, Jimmy? You got them. With that he turned and walked off stage. As Harrison Ford disappeared behind the curtain, the studio remained frozen. Not a whisper, not a breath, just the eerie quiet that follows a lightning strike. Jimmy Kimmel stood alone at his desk, eyes still locked on the exit as if Ford might come back. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. The smile he so often wore, even through controversy, was gone, replaced by something grim and uncertain. The audience finally began to murmur. A few clapped awkwardly. Some looked at each other, visibly uncomfortable. Many simply stared at the empty guest chair, stunned by what they had just witnessed. In the control room, producers frantically debated whether to go to commercial. The segment had gone far beyond anything they had rehearsed. It wasn't just off script, it was off the rails. Moments later, cameras cut to black. But the damage was done. Despite studio staff confiscating as many phones as they could, clips from the confrontation began appearing online within minutes. Blurry, shaky footage of Ford's final remarks spread like wildfire. "You've confused applause with integrity" was already trending on X. A TikTok clip of Ford saying, "You don't fix injustice by erasing voices," had over 3 million views before midnight. By morning, every major news outlet had picked it up. Harrison Ford versus Jimmy Kimmel. Hollywood's generational fault line explodes on live TV. Ford walks off Kimmel after cancel culture clash. The night Jimmy Kimmel lost control, social media exploded into factions. Some praised Ford's courage. Others condemned his remarks as tone-deaf. Commentators on both sides dissected every frame, every syllable, as if examining the Zapruder film. Kimmel, for his part, remained silent for over 48 hours, a rarity for the usually vocal host. When he finally released a statement, it was cautious. "What happened on our show was unexpected. Emotions ran high. I respect Harrison as an actor, but I strongly disagree with many of his views. We will always use this platform to advocate for empathy and progress." But it didn't land. Viewers noticed the cracks in the late-night armor. Ratings for the next episode dropped sharply. Comment sections, once dominated by loyal fans, were filled with critiques calling Kimmel smug, performative, and intolerant of dissent. The hashtag Ford was right trended for days. Meanwhile, Harrison Ford declined all interview requests. He made no further statements. He returned to Wyoming, spent time with family, went flying. But that silence only made his words echo louder. Late-night talk shows, once bastions of easy laughs and light jabs, suddenly felt different. Networks scrambled to coach hosts on how to handle serious moments. Writers' rooms became tense. Comedians debated whether satire had gone too far or not far enough. And in households across the country, people talked, not just about Ford and Kimmel, but about the deeper question beneath it all. What happens when conversation becomes confrontation? When disagreement becomes a weapon? And when the price of speaking your truth is exile from the very stage that invited you? It was, in every sense, a television moment that no one saw coming, and no one would forget. As the lights dimmed on that infamous set, one truth became undeniable. They came for laughs. They witnessed a reckoning.